short video module on creating powerful webinars to promote and grow your consulting business. Now before we start, there's really two objectives to offering a webinar, typically. And when you're speaking about marketing, it's either to make money directly off that webinar or to promote your consulting business so that you can gain new clients. You can do both. Obviously, having a client pay $100 to watch a webinar could mean that they're a very likely prospect to pay you $100 an hour to hire you as a consultant. But you should figure out what your objective is so you can figure out the pricing and the model for your webinar up front, and that'll really help with everything else we're going to talk about right here. So doing a webinar, you hear about them, you might have even participated in a few. They can seem a little bit intimidating if you're doing your first few webinars. The process is really quite simple, and the good news is the software is so inexpensive and so easy to operate that almost anybody who knows how to use programs such as Microsoft Word or Google Docs can pretty much operate a webinar software. And usually it costs anywhere between $20 to $100 a month for webinar software that is top of the line and very professional, and really don't need to be spending any more money than that to get this type of stuff done. The first tip though is to, we end up using GoToWebinar. We're not affiliated with them in any way. It's just an easy system to use. It's worked really well for us. And I believe their website is gotowebinar.com, and it's really easy to download their software. They probably have a trial of some type, but they have a great service, and like I said before, since it's a monthly fee, you can always try it out. You can always cancel it after 1 or 2 months if you're not getting any value out of it or holding enough webinars. The first tip though is to just think of a webinar as a casual, practical training conversation. So if you were going to go to a coffee shop and mentor somebody on the topic of your webinar, what would you tell them? What would you try to present to them? What diagrams would you show? Don't try to make it too formal. Don't try to make it too long, typically. I would try to keep most of the webinars that we do very direct, to the point, and we try to have a lot of it focused on the questions people will have in that space. For example, we recently did a webinar that was only 30 minutes long, but then we did 5 to 7 minutes of covering frequently asked questions that we get all the time. And then what we did was we opened up the floor to other people who had questions on the webinar. And that's another tip, is when you have people on the webinar, you can have them raise their hand and you can kind of call on them, and they can kind of ask using live audio in the webinar. They can kind of ask questions so that everybody hears them asking the question and they hear you answering the question. But in my experience, especially if you have 200, 300, 400 people on your webinar, you're much better off having text questions being submitted so that you can still get live feedback. People can, ask you questions along the way while you're presenting, but you don't have to deal with 20 people having their hand raised and not knowing which question's better. When people send in all of their questions over text, you can kind of pick out the questions that are going to be most valuable for everybody to hear the answers to, where a question that's very technical about, if you're in the consulting business and you're doing a webinar, say on marketing and sales, and you're a marketing and sales consultant, and somebody's asking a very technical question like, what's the website address for, some piece of software that's not even related to marketing and sales, you can always answer that later and follow up with them with an email. You don't need to answer that in front of the whole crowd, obviously. So usually out of the questions that come in, you'll have time to answer 20, 30% of those questions, and the rest you'll have to ignore or answer later. And the great thing about most webinar software is it will send you a report afterwards of each person and what question they asked. So if you weren't able to answer it on the webinar, you could follow up with them over email and answer it completely and fully there. Another tip in completing webinars is to make sure you have your PowerPoint presentation done 2 days before the webinar begins. This way you'll have time to go through and just practice it once or twice, just so it's smooth. You catch the obvious mistakes and just maybe add in a few additional insights, summary pages, conclusions, etc. While putting together your PowerPoint, it might be smart to put in a couple exercises there for people to quickly do while on the webinar. Another way to get people to kind of pay more attention is to ask them to take notes during the webinar, or have some key points and just emphasize that if they haven't taken any notes yet, they might want to write down these few things. And that'll keep you on their mind longer, because after the webinar is done, they'll close down the webinar software, and a day or two later they're going to see those notes there and think about you and your webinar. So it's definitely an important thing to try to get people engaged, try to get them to take notes during the webinar. The next tip is to make sure that when you're running the webinar and getting ready to promote it, that you figure out exactly what price is going to be most appropriate. We've done webinars that were free. We had 600, 700, 800 people join the webinar. We had over 600 questions come in, and one of these lasted for 3 hours actually, because we had so many questions coming in. And it was great, but obviously it was not a profitable webinar directly in itself because it was free to attend. But the good news is what we did get is 800 email leads of people who are interested in that topic. And then we were able to follow up with those people, keep in touch, and most importantly, through delivering a valuable webinar, all those people got a great brand experience with our business and our company, and they might come back and remember us over and over again. So in your consulting firm, figure out, do you want to make money off your webinars to kind of filter people out, only have people come who know you well enough to trust you to pay $97 to watch you give a webinar, and people that have the money to pay that? Or do you want people to be able to watch your webinar with no barriers to entry? Maybe they just have to fill out an email form or their name, and then with just that 2 minutes investment of their time, they can watch an hour-long webinar of you for free because they might not know who you are yet, trust your brand yet, know what your expertise is yet, and this can be a chance to showcase that. In most cases, I believe consulting firms should charge little or nothing for their webinars, unless your consulting business, as a main revenue stream, you're trying to sell $200, $300 webinars and have that be a major source of revenue. But most consulting firms I know of, get less than 5% or 3% of their revenue from products such as webinars or digital information products. So it really depends on your business model, though. The last two tips have to do with recording and CRM systems. CRM systems are customer relationship management systems, and in a consulting firm, your relationships are key to getting recurring clients, gaining larger clients, getting references. And what you should be doing is keeping track of who those top prospect clients are and who are people that know your brand and could potentially work with you in the future. And what you want to do is constantly have more and more of those people in your database so you can send out catalogs about your services, a one-pager, a postcard. You can send out a blast email and tell them about what you do and how you might be able to help them. And it's really important to get as many potential lead contacts as possible that are of high value for your consulting firm. And through running a webinar, you can get a lot of them at once. This is another reason why you should consider offering it for free or very inexpensively, like $17, $27, $47. The last tip is to make sure that you record your webinar. Now, if you want to be safe, you could record it in two ways. Most software for webinars, including GoToWebinar, has the capability to record your webinar within their own software. So they'll record a version of it for you. That's very smart to do, but another option would be to do that as well as run some sort of screen capture recording software such as Camtasia or Screencast or ScreenFlow. And why you do that is so that if one of them breaks down or stops recording, you'll have the other one. If one of them gives you formatting issues since your first time doing it, you'll have the other recording. And it's really good to have it recorded because in the future, you could put that webinar up on your website as a video. You could post some of it on youtube.com. You could send it to new clients as a bonus for signing up with you as a client. They get this free 1 hour webinar for all of the people on their team. Or it could be sent out there only to people who have attended another webinar you offered, and then you give them a link to previous webinars, and they can watch past webinars for free and really get to see that you're an absolute expert within your niche consulting area. So I hope that these tips on how to create really powerful webinars for your consulting business are helpful. These are things that I kind of learned the hard way through watching other people do webinars and slowly put together our own process and ways of doing things. I never really watched a training video on how to do this, so hopefully this really specific knowledge helps you build your business, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Again, this is businesstraining.com, where you can earn master's level qualifications to boost your compensation.